Before we can get into cutting a piece of wood with a router, we need to decide on what bit to use. Router bits vary in size, shape, and capabilities. The type of cut you want to make will dictate the type of router bit you will use. We can break router bits into two categories, with bearings or without bearings. This can also be referred to as piloted and unpiloted router bits. A piloted bit has a bearing or rub collar which guides the router along our workpiece. This bearing could be at the top or the bottom of the router bit. Common bits would include roundover, chamfer, straight, and OG bits. An unpiloted bit has no means of guidance and can cut into the edge of your workpiece. Common bits would include straight, core box, chamfer, and dovetail bits. Once we have selected our router bit, we need to install it in our router. Unplug the router and have the cord end in a visible location. I prefer to fully slide the base off the motor. This gives us unobstructed access to the collet and spindle nut. Take your router bit and push the shank into the collet until it bottoms out in the spindle, and then pull the router bit out 1/8 of an inch. This will ensure the collet does not bottom out on the fillet on the bottom side of the router bit. You want to have as much of the router bit shank engaged into the collet as possible. A minimum of 3/4 of available collet depth should hold the bit shank. Having only a small portion of the router bit engaged is dangerous and can cause the bit to vibrate, wobble, and potentially fly out of the router. Taking the 2 wrenches provided from the manufacturer, align them on the nuts so they can be grasped with one hand. Squeeze the 2 wrenches together using your dominant hand. If the collet nut loosens, flip the wrenches around. I try to avoid using 2 hands when tightening or loosening the collet nut. The wrenches can slip and your knuckles will be sacrificed. Some models will have a spindle lock, so only 1 wrench is required. Install the router bit as previously mentioned and rotate the spindle until the spindle lock engages. Lay the router flat on the table and with the spindle lock engaged in one hand, tighten the collet nut with the wrench in the other hand. After the bit has been installed, attach the router base to the motor and set your depth of cut. Before plugging the router in, put your safety glasses on and hearing protection in. These routers spin sharp carbide bits typically between 8,000 and 30,000 RPM, so ensure there are no entanglement issues. The workpiece should be secured to the table to avoid any shifting mid-cut. If possible, connect a vacuum attachment or use a downdraft table to manage the wood chips and dust. Firmly grasp the router and set the router base on the workpiece. Before you start this router, ensure that the bit is not in contact with the workpiece. Feed direction is important. When looking down at the top of the router, the bit spins in a clockwise direction. For normal upmilling, move the router counterclockwise for the outside edges and clockwise for inside edges. Get your body into a comfortable ready stance and turn the router on. Keep a steady feed rate and proceed around the workpiece. When completed, shut the router off at the motor. Allow the router to come to a complete stop and unplug it from the wall. Remove the base for access to the collet nut and spindle. Using the same one-handed technique, loosen the nut and remove the bit. You may feel some resistance on the collet nut after initially loosening. Keep turning and the bit will come free from the collet. Check the bit for damage and ensure the bit and bearing are clean. If the bearing is not freely spinning, replace it or take it off for cleaning and lubrication. If the bearing becomes seized on the bit, it will burn your material. Slide the base back on the motor and wrap the cord neatly. Do not pull the cord tightly at the motor. This can cause connection issues. Return the router and bit to the designated area. If the router does not operate as it should, tag it for repairs. A nice router and a sharp bit will cut material with ease. I consider this to be one of the most satisfying operations in all woodworking.